winter wind cut through the Colorado territory like a blade forged in hell itself, carrying with it the scent of snow and the promise of death. Sarah McKenna pulled her threadbare shawl tighter around her shoulders as she urged her exhausted mare forward through the darkness. Behind her, somewhere in the vast expanse of prairie, the law rode with torches and rope, their voices carried on the wind like the howls of hungry wolves. She had been running for 3 days now, ever since that terrible moment in Deadwood when everything went wrong. The bank robbery wasn't supposed to happen like that. Nobody was supposed to die. But when Jake Morrison drew his gun on that young teller, Sarah's world had shattered like glass. The bullet that killed the boy might as well have torn through her own heart. Now she was branded a murderer, a fugitive, marked by both the law and her own crushing guilt. Before we continue with Sarah's desperate journey through this unforgiving wilderness, I want to ask you to subscribe to our channel if you're enjoying this story. Also, please let me know in the comments what city you're watching from. I love connecting with listeners from all around the world. The mare stumbled, nearly throwing Sarah from the saddle. The poor animal was as exhausted as she was, foam flecking its muzzle, ribs heaving with each labored breath. They had been pushing hard since dawn, following game trails and creek beds, anything to avoid the main roads where bounty hunters and federal marshals might be waiting. Sarah knew they couldn't go much further. The horse needed rest, water, and feed, but stopping meant risking capture. As if summoned by her desperation, a sound drifted through the night air that made her blood run cold. It was faint at first, barely audible above the wind, but unmistakable, the cry of an infant. Sarah reined in her horse, straining to listen. There it was again, a thin wail that spoke of hunger, cold, and abandonment. Every instinct screamed at her to keep riding, to ignore the sound and focus on her own survival. The law was closing in, and stopping now could mean the difference between freedom and the hangman's noose. But the crying continued, growing weaker with each passing moment, and Sarah found herself unable to move. She had already failed to save one innocent life. Could she really ride past another? The weight of her guilt pressed down on her like a physical thing, heavier than the winter cold, more suffocating than the fear of capture. With a curse that would have made her late mother weep, Sarah dismounted and began following the sound. She found the baby nestled in a shallow depression beneath a cluster of sagebrush, wrapped in what had once been a beautiful beaded blanket, but was now torn and soaked through with melted snow. The child couldn't have been more than a few months old, its tiny face blue with cold, lips barely moving as it struggled to cry. Sarah's heart clenched as she realized this was a Native American infant, probably lost during some terrible flight from soldiers or settlers. Without hesitation, Sarah stripped off her heavy wool coat and the thick blanket she had been using as a bedroll. The cold hit her like a physical blow, but she ignored it as she carefully lifted the baby and wrapped it in her own warm coverings. The child was so small, so fragile, its breathing shallow and irregular. Sarah held it close to her body, sharing what little warmth she had left, whispering soothing words in a voice rough with emotion. "There now, little one," she murmured, rocking gently back and forth. "You're safe now, I've got you." The baby's crying gradually subsided, and Sarah felt a tiny hand grasp weakly at her finger. In that moment, surrounded by the vast emptiness of the prairie, she made a decision that would change everything. She would not abandon this child, no matter the cost to herself. Sarah spent the night huddled against a large boulder, the baby pressed against her chest, her own body shielding the infant from the worst of the wind. She dozed fitfully, starting awake at every sound, expecting at any moment to see torches on the horizon or hear the thunder of approaching hooves. But the night passed quietly, and as dawn began to paint the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold, Sarah allowed herself to hope that perhaps they had lost her trail. The baby stirred in her arms, making soft mewing sounds that tugged at her heart. Sarah looked down at the tiny face, now pink with warmth instead of blue with cold, and felt something she hadn't experienced in years, a sense of purpose that had nothing to do with running or hiding or surviving. This child needed her, depended on her completely, and for the first time since Deadwood, Sarah felt like something other than a killer and a coward. As the sun climbed higher, Sarah began to scan the horizon for any sign of the baby's people. Surely someone was looking for this child, some family torn apart by the endless cycle of violence that plagued the frontier. She had heard stories of entire villages forced to flee in the middle of the night, families scattered to the winds by cavalry charges and burning lodges. Perhaps this baby's mother was out there somewhere, searching desperately for her lost child. The thought of reuniting the infant with its family filled Sarah with a warmth that had nothing to do with the rising sun. Maybe, just maybe, she could do something right for once. Maybe she could save a life instead of taking one. The irony wasn't lost on her. A wanted fugitive caring for an abandoned native child in the middle of nowhere. But sometimes, Sarah reflected, the most unlikely people found themselves in positions to do the most important things. As she prepared to mount her horse with the baby secured against her chest, Sarah noticed something that made her heart skip a beat. There on the distant ridgeline, silhouetted against the morning sky, was a single rider, then another, and another. Within moments, the entire horizon seemed to shimmer with mounted figures, their presence as sudden and startling as a mirage. Sarah's first instinct was to run, but something held her in place. These weren't cavalry soldiers or bounty hunters. The riders sat their horses with a fluid grace that spoke of a lifetime in the saddle, and even at this distance, she could see the distinctive silhouettes of war bonnets and decorated lances. These were Lakota warriors, and they were watching her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. The baby in her arms began to fuss, as if sensing the tension in the air. Sarah looked down at the tiny face and suddenly understood. This wasn't just any native child. This was a Lakota baby, and somehow, impossibly, its people had found them. Her mind raced as she tried to calculate her chances of escape. The mare was exhausted, and she was carrying extra weight now. Against mounted Lakota warriors on fresh horses, she wouldn't make it 100 yards. But as Sarah watched, something extraordinary happened. Instead of charging down the slope with war cries and weapons raised, the warriors began to descend slowly, almost ceremonially. Their lances were held upright, not lowered for attack, and she could hear the rhythmic beating of what sounded like drums echoing across the prairie. This wasn't a war party preparing for battle. This was something else entirely. The lead rider was a magnificent figure, tall and proud in the saddle, his war bonnet trailing eagle feathers that caught the morning light like flames. His horse was a beautiful paint stallion, its coat gleaming with health and careful grooming. As he drew closer, Sarah could see that his face was painted with intricate designs in red and yellow ochre, and his chest bore the scars of the sun dance ritual. This was clearly a man of great importance among his people. Behind him rode nearly 100 warriors, each one mounted on a horse that spoke of wealth and status within the tribe. But what caught Sarah's attention wasn't their weapons or their war paint. It was the extra horses they led behind them. Dozens of beautiful animals, their manes braided with ribbons and feathers, their saddles decorated with intricate beadwork. And the sound she had heard wasn't war drums at all, but something far more significant. The deep, resonant beating of ceremonial drums that spoke of celebration, rather than conflict. As the warriors formed a great circle around her, Sarah found herself at the center of what could only be described as a spectacle. The drumming grew louder, more complex, joined by the haunting sound of bone whistles and the rhythmic chanting of voices raised in harmony. The baby in her arms had stopped crying entirely, as if recognizing the voices of its people, and Sarah felt a strange sense of peace settle over her despite the surreal nature of the situation. The war chief, for that's what he had to be, dismounted with fluid grace and approached her on foot. His eyes, dark as obsidian and just as sharp, took in every detail of the scene. The exhausted white woman, the native baby wrapped in her own blankets, the clear evidence that she had sacrificed her own comfort for the child's welfare. When he spoke, his voice was deep and resonant, carrying easily over the sound of drums and chanting. "You saved the child of our blood," he said in heavily accented but clear English. "Little singing bird, daughter of my sister, lost when the bluecoats came in the night. We have searched for 3 sons, following the trail of her cries on the wind. We found you instead, white woman, holding our precious one as if she were your own." Sarah's throat felt dry as dust, but she managed to find her voice. "I couldn't leave her," she said simply. "She was dying. I had to help." The war chief studied her for a long moment, his gaze seeming to look straight through to her soul. Then, to her amazement, he smiled, an expression that transformed his stern features completely. "The spirits have spoken," he announced, his voice carrying to every warrior in the circle. "This woman has shown the greatest courage, not the courage of the warrior who faces death in battle, but the courage of the mother who gives her life for her child. She has proven herself worthy of our respect, our gratitude, and our protection." What happened next would remain burned in Sarah's memory for the rest of her life. At some unseen signal, the warriors began to move in a complex pattern around the circle, their horses stepping in time with the drums. One by one they approached her, each leading a magnificent horse decorated for ceremony. The first warrior, a young man with kind eyes and gentle hands, offered her the reins to a beautiful chestnut mare with a white star on her forehead. "For your courage," he said simply, before riding back to his place in the circle. The next warrior brought a black stallion with silver decorations woven into its mane. "For your kindness," he announced. And so it continued, each warrior offering a horse and a reason. For her sacrifice, for her compassion, for her willingness to risk everything for a child not her own. By the time the ceremony was complete, Sarah found herself surrounded by nearly 50 horses, each one worth a fortune on the frontier, each one a symbol of respect and gratitude from a people she had been taught to fear. But the greatest surprise was yet to come. The war chief approached her one final time, but now he was not alone. Behind him walked an elderly woman whose bearing spoke of great wisdom and authority, and beside her, a young woman of breathtaking beauty whose eyes held depths of intelligence and strength. "I am Chief Standing Bear," the war chief announced formally. "This is Grandmother Willow, keeper of our traditions, and this is my daughter Morning Star, who has seen 22 winters and remains unmarried by her own choice." He paused, his eyes meeting Sarah's directly. "The spirits have shown us a vision. They say that the woman who saved our child is meant to become part of our family, to find the peace that has been stolen from her by the world of the white man." Sarah's heart began to race as she realized what he was suggesting. Around the circle, the drumming had changed again, taking on the deep rhythmic pattern she had heard earlier. This wasn't just any drumming. This was the sacred rhythm of a wedding ceremony, the sound that announced the joining of two lives before the eyes of the spirits and the community. "You speak of marriage," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper, "but you don't know me. You don't know what I've done, the things I'm running from." Chief Standing Bear nodded gravely, his expression serious, but not unkind. "We know you are hunted by the white man's law," he said. "We know you carry the weight of death on your spirit, but we also know that you chose to save a life when you could have chosen to save yourself. That tells us everything we need to know about who you truly are." Morning Star stepped forward then, her movements graceful as a deer's, her voice soft but clear. "I have dreamed of you," she said, speaking directly to Sarah. 3 nights ago, the spirits showed me a vision of a white woman with hair like autumn leaves and eyes like the sky before a storm. In my dream, you held a child of our people, and the spirits whispered that you would bring great changes to our tribe, that through you, the old wounds between our peoples might begin to heal. The baby in Sarah's arms chose that moment to wake fully, gurgling and reaching toward Morning Star with tiny hands. The young Lakota woman smiled and gently took the child, cradling her with the practiced ease of someone who had helped raise many children. "Little singing bird knows you are meant to be here," she said. "Children see with the eyes of the spirits. They cannot be fooled by the masks we wear or the lies we tell ourselves." Sarah felt tears beginning to flow down her cheeks, hot against her cold skin. For so long she had been running, from the law, from her past, from the crushing weight of guilt that threatened to destroy her. But here, in this impossible moment, surrounded by people who should have been her enemies, she felt something she had almost forgotten existed: hope. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Why would you do this? Why would you offer me sanctuary, marriage, a new life? I'm a stranger, a fugitive. I bring nothing but trouble." Chief Standing Bear's smile was sad but wise, the expression of a man who had seen too much suffering and learned to recognize the difference between those who chose evil and those who were simply broken by it. "Because, daughter of the white world, you have already proven that when faced with a choice between your own safety and the life of an innocent, you choose the innocent. That is not the action of a bad person. That is the action of someone whose spirit has been wounded but not destroyed." He gestured to the circle of warriors around them. "Every man here has made mistakes. Every woman in our village has known sorrow. But we judge people not by their worst moments, but by what they do when they think no one is watching." The ceremony that followed was unlike anything Sarah could have imagined. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, the Lakota warriors and their families, for Sarah now realized that many of the riders were women and children who had been hidden behind the warriors, began to prepare for a celebration that would last until sunset. Fires were built, food was prepared, and the air filled with the sounds of laughter and singing. Morningstar took Sarah to a beautifully decorated teepee that had been erected with stunning speed and efficiency. Inside, she found clothing that had clearly been prepared in advance. A wedding dress of soft doeskin decorated with thousands of tiny beads and patterns that told the story of the seasons, of life and death and rebirth. As Morningstar helped her change, Sarah marveled at the intricate workmanship, the hours of labor that had gone into creating something so beautiful. "How did you know?" Sarah asked as Morningstar braided her hair with ribbons and feathers. "How could you have prepared all this before you even found me?" Morningstar's smile was mysterious, touched with the wisdom of someone who had learned to trust in things beyond the physical world. "The spirits speak to those who know how to listen," she said simply. "Grandmother Willow saw you in the smoke of the sacred fire 4 days ago. She told us to prepare for a wedding, that a woman would come who would need our protection and our love. We thought she meant someone from a neighboring tribe, but the spirits had other plans." As Sarah emerged from the teepee in her wedding dress, the entire gathering fell silent. She felt exposed, vulnerable, but also strangely powerful. The woman who had entered that teepee had been a fugitive, a killer, someone running from justice and drowning in guilt. The woman who emerged was still all of those things, but she was also something more. She was someone who had been chosen, someone who had been deemed worthy of love and acceptance despite her flaws. The wedding ceremony itself was a blend of ancient tradition and improvised adaptation. Chief Standing Bear served as both father of the bride and officiant, his deep voice carrying the sacred words across the prairie as the sun reached its zenith. Morningstar stood beside Sarah, translating the Lakota phrases and helping her understand the significance of each ritual element. When it came time for the exchange of vows, Sarah found herself speaking words she had never expected to say, promises she had never thought she would be able to make. "I promise to honor your people as my people," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I promise to protect the children of this tribe as I would protect my own. I promise to use whatever skills I have, whatever knowledge I possess, in service of this family that has chosen to accept me." Morningstar's vows were equally moving, spoken in both Lakota and English, so that Sarah could understand every word. "I promise to help you heal from the wounds of your past," she said. "I promise to stand beside you when the white man's law comes calling. I promise to love you not despite your scars, but because of the strength they represent." As the ceremony concluded and the celebration began in earnest, Sarah found herself swept up in a whirlwind of new experiences. She was introduced to dozens of people, each with their own story, their own reasons for accepting her into their community. There was Grey Wolf, a warrior who had lost his entire family to a cavalry raid, but still found room in his heart for forgiveness. There was Laughing Water, a woman who had been captured by white settlers as a child and later escaped, bringing with her knowledge of both worlds that had proven invaluable to the tribe. The feast that followed was a revelation. Sarah had grown up on simple frontier fare, beans, hardtack, and whatever game could be hunted or trapped. But the Lakota meal was a symphony of flavors and textures: buffalo meat seasoned with wild herbs, corn prepared in ways she had never imagined, berries and roots that had been carefully preserved for the winter months. Each dish told a story, represented a connection to the land and the seasons that went back countless generations. As the afternoon wore on, Sarah began to understand that this wasn't just a wedding. It was an adoption ceremony, a formal acceptance into a family and a way of life that was completely different from anything she had ever known. The horses that had been given to her weren't just gifts. They were symbols of her new status within the tribe, markers of the respect and trust that had been placed in her. But perhaps the most moving moment came when Grandmother Willow approached her as the sun began to set. The elderly woman's face was a map of years and wisdom, her eyes holding depths of knowledge that seemed to span centuries. She carried with her a small bundle wrapped in soft leather, which she placed gently in Sarah's hands. "This belonged to my grandmother's grandmother," she said in careful English. "It has been passed down through 7 generations of women in our family. Now it belongs to you." Sarah unwrapped the bundle with trembling fingers, revealing a necklace of incredible beauty. Dozens of small silver discs connected by sinew, each one engraved with symbols that seemed to dance in the firelight. "It is the necklace of the Keeper of Stories," Grandmother Willow explained. "The woman who wears it is responsible for remembering the tales of our people, for passing them down to the next generation. But more than that, she is responsible for creating new stories, for helping our people understand how the old ways can survive in a changing world. As Sarah fastened the necklace around her throat, she felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. But it wasn't the crushing weight of guilt she had carried for so long. This was different, purposeful, meaningful. She was being asked not just to join this family but to help shape its future. The celebration continued long into the night, with dancing and singing and storytelling around fires that painted the faces of the gathered people in warm, flickering light. Sarah found herself drawn into conversations about everything from hunting techniques to child-rearing practices, from the best methods for preserving meat to the complex political situation facing all native tribes as white settlement continued to expand westward. It was during one of these conversations that the reality of her situation truly hit her. She was no longer just Sarah McKenna, bank robber and fugitive. She was now Sarah Standing Bear, wife of Morning Star, member of the Lakota Nation, and keeper of stories. The transformation was so complete, so sudden, that it left her feeling dizzy with the magnitude of the change. But as she looked around at the faces surrounding her, faces that showed acceptance, warmth, and genuine affection, Sarah realized that this wasn't really a transformation at all. This was a homecoming. For the first time in her life, she was exactly where she belonged, with people who saw her not as a criminal or an outcast, but as a valuable member of their community. The night air was filled with the sound of drums and laughter, but underneath it all, Sarah could hear something else, the whisper of the wind across the prairie, carrying with it the promise of new beginnings and second chances. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new responsibilities, new ways of understanding the world. But tonight, surrounded by her new family under a canopy of stars that seemed to stretch on forever, Sarah McKenna felt something she had almost forgotten was possible. She felt at peace. As the fires began to die down and people started to drift toward their teepees, Morning Star took Sarah's hand and led her toward their new home. The teepee was beautiful, decorated with paintings that told the story of the seasons and the eternal cycle of life, death, and rebirth. Inside, buffalo robes had been arranged to create a warm, comfortable space that felt both intimate and sacred. "Are you afraid?" Morning Star asked as they settled down together. The baby, little singing bird, sleeping peacefully between them. Sarah considered the question seriously. Was she afraid? Of course she was. She was afraid of the law catching up with her, afraid of bringing danger to her new family, afraid of not being able to live up to the trust that had been placed in her. But underneath the fear was something stronger, a sense of rightness, of destiny fulfilled. "Yes," she said honestly, "but I'm also hopeful. For the first time in years, I'm hopeful." Morning Star smiled and squeezed her hand gently. "Good," she said. "Hope is what keeps us alive when everything else fails. Hope is what brought you to us, and hope is what will help us build a future together." As Sarah drifted off to sleep, surrounded by the warmth of her new family and the soft sounds of the prairie night, she reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her to this moment. Less than 24 hours ago, she had been a desperate fugitive, running from justice and drowning in guilt. Now she was a wife, a mother figure to a rescued child, and a valued member of a community that had accepted her completely, despite knowing nothing about her past except that she had chosen to save a life when she could have chosen to save herself. The irony wasn't lost on her. In trying to escape the consequences of taking a life, she had found herself in a position to save one, and in saving that life, she had somehow saved her own as well. The law might still be looking for Sarah McKenna, but Sarah McKenna no longer existed. In her place was Sarah Standing Bear, keeper of stories, protector of children, and living proof that redemption was possible even in the harshest circumstances. As sleep finally claimed her, Sarah's last conscious thought was a prayer of gratitude to whatever spirits or forces had guided her to this moment. She had been lost, but now she was found. She had been broken, but now she was healing. She had been alone, but now she was home. The wind continued to whisper across the prairie, carrying with it the promise of tomorrow and all the tomorrows that would follow. And in a tipi decorated with the symbols of hope and renewal, a former fugitive slept peacefully in the arms of her new family, dreaming not of the past she was running from, but of the future she was running toward. The transformation was complete. The woman who had given her blanket to a lost baby had received in return something far more valuable than warmth. She had received a new life, a new identity, and a new chance at happiness. In the vast expanse of the American frontier, where justice was often harsh and forgiveness rare, the Lakota had offered something precious beyond measure, the opportunity for redemption through love. And as the stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance, the prairie held its breath, waiting to see what stories would be born from this unlikely union of two worlds, two hearts and two souls who had found in each other exactly what they needed to heal.